years ago, in 2009, as I said in the trailer, I became a father and I started reflecting on my work as a photojournalist, a war correspondent. Had a number of frustration that I had built over the years, practicing my work, and it took a really long time to kind of synthesize those frustrations and try to start thinking differently about them and see what I could do about them. So 2008, December, my daughter was born. 2009, 3 weeks later, I'm done in Gaza. And there, from a normal assignment as a war correspondent, going with the fighters, I'm standing next to a hole that is huge. When I say huge, it's like quite the size of a building, very deep. I'm asking the fighters from the Islamic Jihad, which I'm with at that point, what is the hole? And they told me there was just an attack the day before from Israel. They tried to get one of the fighters and leaders, and that was and I said, again. Here again, I am making the same photos, meeting the same people. It's 10 years I've been here now. And those are the kids that were in my camera when I was, starting to work in Gaza. So the cycle of violence and all of this. And I don't know why, suddenly I changed thing. Instead of working horizontally, I moved vertically. And I did some portraits, and I asked them 6 questions, and I recorded their answer. I did this with this group, with the Hamas, and with some other factions down there. Then I crossed the border, and I went to Israel and talked to the IDF. I was on assignment for Newsweek, not for that work though, but that's what I'm. And the IDF, so the Israeli Defense Forces, put me in contact with the numbers of the fighters, and I did the same portraits, recording the same questions. And the idea there was like, suddenly, what if I put those portraits on the wall, draw a border, and if you're on one side of the border, you can hear one fighter, and if you cross, you can hear the other one. I was looking for a sense of agency from my audience. That was the genesis of the project. It was really hard to kind of convince people, because that was not something I was doing. So in the journalism world, they look at me and they says, this is too arty. When I went to the art sides, they says, this is a little too much non-fiction for us. We don't know what to do with this. So for years, I kept doing more part, Israel, Palestine, Kashmir, and I went to South Sudan, but it took years. Didn't really went anywhere. I mean, it was published in Le Monde, Foreign Policy, and numbers of publications. But again, I was trying to do something else, and it was a long process before I did get there. I had a year as an Nieman Fellow. That's what brought me to Cambridge. And during that year, I met Sarah and William. And we discussed on the 4th, 5th floor. And that's where we get right there, my number 1 point, have a story. I mean, if you want to build up a project, it doesn't matter the medium, it doesn't matter how you're going to get there ultimately at the end. The most important thing will be the content and what you want to say. And with this, 2 other things. Who you want to talk to with that content. So be very precise from the early stage of your project. That's what I had with the enemy. I knew I wanted to talk to the next generation of fighters. I had to some extent the credibility of my work and what my proposition was at that point, because I already had done it photographically, so which helps also building your case to some extent for moving forward with your work. And eventually in this, have a dream of scalability, because reaching audiences, if it's to reach really a small numbers, then suddenly it may be something that you don't want to put years of effort, or your funders or your partners might look at you and say, well, to reach that little numbers, we're not sure we want to invest in this. So that was really the first stage. But at that point, I had a clear concept. I had tested it kind of some extent photographically, but VR was not even part of that project at that point. I knew what I wanted to do. I was invited by William and Sarah. And basically they told me, think about that project, but outside of your medium. There is a lot of resources around. There is a lot of people thinking about, new technologies. Look around, you're going to be part of the family here, so, which I did. And it's true that I went to a lot of different places, but very quickly I was invited by Oculus, who was making a presentation here 4 years ago, still a relatively small company at that point, of the new technology. I tried it out. It blew my mind, but it was like just a few minutes. As a matter of fact, I have vertigo, so when they put me into the VR, I felt the vertigo that I have, even though I was sitting here, and started thinking about this project and directly reflecting on the project that I had, which was called back then Portrait of the Enemies. I asked the engineers that were there from Oculus and says, I have this project with photo. Do you think I can put the people outside of the photo in the room? And people told me yes. It's getting there. We're getting to that point. So yeah, that would be possible. They also told me that would be very expensive. At that point, I had zero budget, very few partners, and it was not about money. It was just about pushing a concept into another medium. But see, first the content, eventually some scalability because I want numbers of people to go through, and a clear target audience, because then everything you're going to do after will be to reach that audience. So the medium really comes after. VR is there. At that point, there was no, about 4 years ago, there was no distinction between 360 video, CGI, in-room VR, even the Google Cardboard. I mean, all of this wasn't on the table at that point. But yeah, a buzz was start to be created. The next step was to build on the partnership that I had, more partnerships. So France Télévisions came on board about the same time as you guys, who said, we are interested in this project. On the concept, yet we were not in VR, but once we moved to VR, it was more easy to start targeting organization and people we would like to work with, and people that could also help the project exist to some extent. So once we moved to VR, Camera Lucida, which is the executive producer of the work today, came on board. That was in December, so 2 months after I discovered virtual reality and I started thinking about it, designing on a paper what it could look like, and more than what it could look like, all the questions that I had about this, like what happened to journalism if you suddenly put someone with body language in a room, is it going to be credible, is it going to be kind of good looking enough or realistic enough so people would engage with that content, or would it be this uncanny valley that everyone was talking about? And that was a very scary thing, was to bring a lot of people into a dead-end project. From there, building partnerships was really key, because with Camera Lucida, we could channel fundings, we could start applying to a lot of grants, whether it was in France, whether there was the Tribeca New Media grants. I was invited at Sundance, the New Frontier Lab, where there was not about funding, but it was about really pressing me all the way left, right, down, center, with a lot of different people from different backgrounds about the project. And that was really, really, really good also to kind of make sense of what I wanted to do and to which extent that would be possible. But how do you tackle the storytelling part if you start working in space? I remind you, I was a photojournalist. I was not someone who has done theater before. I'm not a filmmaker neither, which I would say eventually was an asset, because I didn't have to get luggage out of my back or bad habits, not really bad habits, but habits that wouldn't translate very well into VR, and especially VR in room. So building partnerships, so with this, it was finding the right company that could help us make that a reality. So it means developers, 3D company, people that understand what we want to do, that were on board with this, finding the technological solution for that. At that point also, very early on, we did a technological risk assessment. Is this possible? Can we go there? Because the vision was clear, but the technology wasn't. And everything was like moving very fast, but would that move fast enough? Would that be off-the-shelf things, or would that be something from a lab here? Then it's going to be really harder to scale this and to put it out if it's something that is not patented or still in development in terms of technology. The technological risk assessment came back shaky, but doable. We'll see with the timing, and eventually at the end, we've been very fortunate with the timing of the technologies coming out until really the last technologies, the last component of the project coming at the right time. But we'll be talking about it later. So the funding, pushing the storytelling with Sundance, and finally making sense of how technologically that would be possible, and the partnership that we needed to build with this. I need to give my hat here to immersive 3D, the company in Paris, who's been not only rebuilding everything you've seen inside, but also the technological solution around, with the tracking, with the choice of the computer, setting up all the whole thing. And as a matter of fact, they're not even here while we have 3 months of museum. They are back in Paris. So sometimes they jump on a computer, tweak one thing, but they do that remotely. So we can really distribute this work without having a permanence on the work itself. Well, the media was choose, but it's really about that point that where you decide you're going to really go into that directions, because you've now found some hope in technologies in a way that you're going to be able to do it. The funding is clearing its way, and you start gathering the right partners around. And then from there, it's really about prototyping your idea, putting users in, and that's a slow process. I mean, let me remind you, the project took 4 years, which gives a good blueprint of what you need to go through to some extent. But 4 years is a very long time for a project. So of course you need to be patient. Of course you need to find the resources to survive during that time, and at the same time really focus on the users and how we go through. So we had all those partners at that point, enough funding to really start working on the project, and we decided to do a prototype and put to the test the real idea of what I wanted to do. It was first a single user, so all the problems were not resolved with the prototype, but at least the storytelling that works in it. Could people move in it? So I went to Israel and Gaza, filmed fighters in Gaza, filmed fighters, soldiers in Israel. We rebuilt this over the summer, and when I say we, it's not really me, it's more of the team. But filming in May, by October, we start having the two fighters recomposed into their interviews, rebuilt into their interviews. Maybe I could show you. I'm thinking I have some media here. I always forget to show them to you. So when we scan the fighters, was it? No, that's not this. Okay, here I think. So that's Gilad, the Israeli fighters, once we've been scanning them in Israel. And that texture has been brought back to his kind of volume at that point. At that point, we had photographed Gilad and each of the fighters, about 100 HD photographs from all the angles, and then we reglue those photographs. And then from there, it's really a reanimation of, through the video that we have of the interview, of everything they do during the time. When do they close their eyes? How do they speak? We have a close-up of the face, of course, because it's really important. But we also have a view on all the parts of the body around the fighter that we doing the interview with. And then very quickly on, I couldn't see it yet. I think it's this. I couldn't see it yet, but that was what was the result at the end. So photorealistic interview. This we're testing, can he follow us with his eyes? And what would that look like? But that's once it's been reanimated and put in place. That's one of the first things I saw from Gilad, and felt really good, because that's at that point I says, well, that might work. That might work in terms of credibility, in terms of sense of presence. Of course, I was not yet into the Oculus at that point. That's something that came a little bit later. But once we did this prototype, we had to put people through. So we came to New York and put a numbers of people through, and we could see a lot of emotions. And this is something I wasn't expecting so far in the work, but people were responding extremely positively. If you know, some of you know Fox Harrell, professor here. When you talk to Fox move his head slightly like this. It's really engaging, and when I saw Fox in front of Gilad, or I can't remember if it was Gilad or Abu Khaled, nodding like this, I said, well, I think we're on the right direction here. So Fox had come down to New York to check out the work, because at that point we were starting thinking about how to bring science in this, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, and Fox and I had met before while I was doing my fellowship here, and we had found a lot of alignments in our life. I mean, now we come from very different backgrounds, but at least what we wanted to do with his expertise, or with my expertise, were really similar. So we were looking for an opportunity to collaborate together, and in this case, the enemy seemed like to be a good excuse. So at that point, really prototyping, iteration, talking with the users. As a photojournalist, I could never meet the people who were looking at my photograph. Here, I was outside when people were lifting their headsets. I was debriefing with them. It's something that is really important for all the little steps that we do, what works, what doesn't work. And that informs you, and it's really about the numbers of people you're going to put through and the feedback you're going to have that you're going to start tweaking left and right. But you need to assume that you're on the right road because you go on a road that some people haven't, or most of the people haven't tried before, and then from there see if this is as you expected or different or better. In some case, it was a disappointment, and in some case, it was really something that was really taking by and seeing the level of emotions in my audience at that point was good. It went so well that we were invited to present at Tribeca Film Festival publicly, even though it was just a prototype. So that was for me another chance to see another group of users, people that are not really fond of what we do or not really into what we do, but like more, walk of life people from New York going through this. Same here. I had people involved in the conflict one way or another. It was Israel-Palestine, and been really touched by it. And I had people that had nothing to do with the conflict at all, and still really been shaken by the work. And all of this gave me the sense that we were in the right direction. But again, it was just a prototype. It was, can I tell a story in the space? The space is about this room. Can I tell the story in this space? Do I need to guide my audience within that? Do they understand what is their position within the space, their role, and how do we make all of this clear for the users? Did work that from there more funding could come because we had now a prototype that we could show funders. And that was the goal of the prototype, by the way. It wasn't to show publicly. I mean, it was to reassure ourselves that we were doing something that we actually make sense of. And eventually, if that makes sense, show it to founders and say, we need more cash. We're working on this. It hasn't been done before, and it's rather expensive. They told me from the start, and they're right. So is there any chance? In that case, I mean, the official budget would be 1.6 million. The unofficial budget will be way more than that because there is partners that have been putting more money. I haven't recouped their money on the project. So once we were at that point, it was about producing more content. It was about showing that conflict, Israel-Palestine, was interesting in itself, but it was the same mechanism of dehumanizing the other was also in place in other conflicts. It's in my view, it's exactly the same process. But I want to show it. It is not just about this conflict, it's about all of us. So I went to Congo, a very expensive production, but I went and met some fighters from 2 different sides in Congo, spent about a month on the ground there, had the chance to visit the mines and go really deep into the reason of the conflict for the minerals in Congo, and was really blown away by that conflict that I hadn't covered before. And then we went and we did El Salvador. And from there, at that point, during the same time, we've developed the science with Fox. So I've spent 2 years as an artist in residence at the Open Doc Lab, and then was taken over by the Center for Art, Science and Technology, and spent 2 more years here to keep working, and at that point really working with Fox and try to develop the algorithm and all the things we wanted to develop for the enemy. Because again, for me from the start, it was not just about putting you in between 2 fighters and having you navigating that space and realizing eventually what I realized, but it was also to how can we make something that universal that it reflects on you. It's something that you go through and something that sticks with you. And for me, science there was something that I was really interested in working with. And Fox and I have started thinking about how we could track the people within that space and how we could change the narrative. Not radically change the narrative, because the content is the same for everyone inside, but the reflection. As a matter of fact, and I can tell that on the record now, but at early stage of working with Fox, he says, you cannot tell that right now, but we're going to be working on ambiguity. And for a scientist, working on ambiguity is something kind of ambiguous. And the ambiguity was to leave the audience at the end ponder on the experience and get its own truth, and not trying to impose really scientific metadata and say, this is what you are, this is how you lived your experience, but leave something that is much more open to interpretation. Not mysterious in a way, but can be if you don't understand the system, and someone interested by systems, it's of course something you reflect on and you try to understand. As a matter of fact, I have a lot of questions from users about that system. So yeah, putting in place the storytelling in a bigger scale, putting the science in, and more content, and see if that still works. That means finding more bigger space to iterate. At that point, I was working a lot in Paris, and we had some partnership with the Centre Pompidou, and then some other big space where we could iterate and put the technological challenge in one place, and see if that would work. We came to here, actually, for the first time in May, when you did the conference for the VR. We had the first multi-users experience here, and develop and keep on working on this. Having multi-users really changed the experience, because suddenly you are with other people, even though you don't know who they are, but you are with the other people in a room, so there is a group dynamic that can affect the way you live the experience. But it was, again, very interesting and that's scalability to some extent. It's being able to bring more people in. So at the end of the day, you can go to a museum, you can go to a gallery and say, okay, I cannot bring you 5,000 people a day, but I can bring 200 or 250 people a day. That starts making sense for public space to host, because if you say, if you have 50 minutes experience, it's for one person, and you have 7 hours open a day, you can put 7 people in it, and then from there, you've got a great content, but you don't reach audiences. That was for the VR. At that point also, we partners with the National Film Board of Canada, where they wanted to, they were really, from the early stage, close to the project, but not being really officially involved, but at that point decided that they would want to take the augmented reality component of the project and develop it through Canada. That's part of the distribution, and we'll be talking about it in a few seconds. That was another huge challenge, and as a matter of fact, the app is available and you can download it. Because you move from a very immersive environment in VR, where you really control the whole space and the whole experience, to augmented reality, which is much more. You don't know when the phone's going to ring, when you're going to have an alert. There's so many more things that can happen around you using your phone. And how do you tell a story through augmented reality? Again, there was not so much things we could look around. It was not easy to work on that. That was probably the hardest part. I think part of the reason is also I was so focused on the VR, and I had spent so many hours designing the VR and trying to be in it, and having tested it for quite some time at that point, that projecting with exactly the same contents myself into another medium was not an easy thing to do. But I had a good team in Canada, and we brainstormed a lot. And again, I'll say, but in September this year, Apple came with the AR kit, which allows much more movement in the AR than it was possible before. So again, an alignment, and in that case, a lot of luck to have a technology that came at the right time for the content we had. And that brings me to kind of the 3 points of distribution. You have the VR distribution, doesn't really exist. You know you're going to be able to interest museums or galleries or festivals or those kind of things, but it's a heavy deployment. For you guys who've been to the MIT Museum, or some of you in Paris, or in Israel, it's always like a heavy development. You need a crew to set up the whole place. You need to set up the actual dimension of the room to your experience, and that requires a lot of developments all the time, at least to adapt to each of the space we go. But it's really a good experience at the end also, because you kind of create an expertise as how to develop VR in room and distribute it all over the world. And there is, like, for example, it's really hard to ship batteries. And when you have 20 users, which means probably, I don't know how many we've got at the MIT Museum, but about 30 computers, that means we've got 60 batteries, and we have extra on top of that, so it's 90 batteries to ship over from Paris to here, and that's not something that is just this, is a complicated thing. So you have the rest of the material, the setup, So there is really an expertise that had to be developed from Camera Lucida as how to do that and how to do that remotely, in partnership, of course, with MEC, who has built the whole space inside. The distribution for the augmented reality is, I would say, rather classic one. Marketing investments from the different partners, the word of mouth, being present on the stores, having the media that talks about it, and do a few demos in the media. But there was not really a strategy that has been developed specifically for the AR. I think that's this one. And the last distribution is the one that I'm working on right now. We are in discussion with a big NGO to bring the VR component and the AR component directly to my target audience, which means Israel, Palestine, Congo, and El Salvador, to bring back the experience there. That's a huge challenge. If you go to Congo, for example, the internet is really poor. The electricity is not stable at all, so it's really hard to make run so much hardware on an electricity that goes up and down, up and down. So in that case, the augmented reality is much more easy to bring. It's just about bringing 10 or 15 iPads, having a generator, a four-wheel drive, and then here you go. You can go in a village of Congo and try to put that out and bring that journalism to the target audience and the next generation of fighters. That is very exciting. And we're trying now with that organization to also develop. I mean, we have the app, but to design and tailor the app to really their needs, which are impact measurement. So it's adding components to the app right now. We have 2 cameras on a phone. We cannot do that with Apple device, but with Android device you can. And one camera is pointing at you actually and reading your sentiments and reading how you react to that experience. It's something we're trying to do and develop and propose to the NGO. It's trying to be aligned because they're going to have to see how much that works, how much efficient it is, and have kind of an impact measurement component into their investments. It's kind of redesigning this, adding some language into the system that we need. We need Hebrew, Arabic, Kinyarwanda, Lingala, and Kiswahili, and Spanish. And so in order that all the target audience can understand it in their native language, the experience as of today exists in French and English. And yeah, I think going super fast on everything. That's about it. We did get to the distribution, so yeah. Now we can start the conversation. Because when you go so fast, of course, I cannot touch on everything, and I'm sure that has provoked, or I hope has provoked a number of questions on your side that I'm absolutely willing to answer. And yeah.
So you've been running a lot of people through this. What have those reactions been like? Are they consistent with the earliest reactions? Do you see changes? Any trends in how you're seeing audiences respond?
I see people being really touched by the message, but being here at MIT, just always, I want to know more about that. I want to discover really if there is a change. Is this just a conceptual change? Is this really a change of perspective? And try to go further in this. I could say just as a storyteller, as a journalist, I'm really happy about the effect that my work has on the people, but I don't know the lasting effect of that experience. I'm hoping, obviously, like any storyteller, that it sticks, then it stays, then from a conceptual change you go to a change of perspective, but I cannot say this is really happening. I mean, I could give example that would support that, but that would be like a preaching for my own church. So at this point now, we are collaborating with Herzliya University in Israel, where the neuroscience department is seeking funding through the Israeli Foundation for Science and other partners to do a neuroscience study on the enemy that would last at least 2 to 4 years. And that would bring exactly my target audience, young Palestinians and young Israeli that are involved in the conflict but haven't yet been active in the conflict, and see if there is a change of perspective, conceptual change of perspective. And this would, that's At the end of the work, this is really what I'm looking forward, is to try to understand that, share those research. It's obviously a research from the university that can be shared, and we can all understand what, if there is change, and what, and really what is behind that. So that will be using functional MRI and go really on a neuroscience research on this. But as a storyteller, I can feel that people are really touched. That the marketing term for that, the conversion rate is really high. That people really, in the vast majority, go out of this, pondering and wondering and kind of one way or another thinking about it. But going beyond that, it's the user to say more than me as the creator. But I'm kind of hopeful, but yet I cannot give hard proof of change or lasting change with the enemy yet.
But how about, along those lines, because I think we do come out of it with all kinds of questions and really with a lot of thought. Have you thought about even just having conversations between people who experience it, or having it in, like I think of collisions and how it's been at Davos and Davos and World Economic Forum, and in these groups it's in very structured groups where they see it, and then there's conversation after, and sort of.
Yeah,
it could be a place to sort of a jumping off point for it.
It's really, for me, and from the start, it's been a grassroots kind of way of looking at my work. It was not to try to influence leadership or try to go, as a matter of fact, I was invited at the Israeli parliament. I would have had to work my way, but I was invited to go there at the Knesset and present the enemy. But for me, I don't see I don't even have any hope of change if I go there. The people really have too strong interest. They know most of the things the project says, and they don't really take that into account. It's a stereotype, maybe on my side. Maybe it's something. It's my own bias. But I really designed the work to have the next generation of young people going through. There is also an alignment in between the technology and the use and things that they wouldn't be interested if I present this in a newspaper. But certainly because it's VR, you can target younger audience and they can come kind of excited about the work just because the medium in that case.
Right. And also like the idea that your biases then therefore implicates you more, right?
Yeah, of course.
And then my other, just one more question was about the algorithm, and we always feel like, what is the algorithm that you're creating? It's always a mystery, it's not transparent. Is that something that comes up a lot? And are you thinking at all about sort of disclosing the methodology that you're using to come up with the experience that people have?
There is no secret recipe behind. It's not something that we're trying to actively hide. If I don't talk so much about it, it's because I've put a lot of intention, and we've worked a lot, Fox and I together, but I'm not a developer. I'm not I haven't write the codes exactly, so I know what is the implication of the algorithm within the space. I cannot probably explain it the same way Fox would explain it or a developer would explain it, but basically the goal of the algorithm was to be able to, at the start, it was to see if we can see some stereotypes you have, but we don't have enough data. We need to multiply the hardware in order to scientifically says you've been really reacting weirdly with that person, and we believe it's a bias, and to give that feedback.
Like if you nod to this person, that means that you're more
It's not if you nod,
like
it's just a comparison of all your active behavior within that. And if one behavior becomes very different in front of one, or what has been the most different in front of the 6 fighters that you had, it's not so much because you nod. That could be the opposite. You nod on everyone, and then with one guy you don't nod, and that becomes the exception. So it's not the nodding in itself. It's like trying to detect a different cognitive change in your way of interacting with one fighter. And this is your cognitive, but it's also the distance you have, how you look back at one fighter compared to the other, and it's about what all of this is compared. But again, we're not coming up with scientifically saying, hey, you've been really carrying some bias towards that guy, and think about it, because we don't have those data to support this. But because we decided from the start, and I like that idea to be ambiguous, the fact that at the end you end up in front of a mirror, A mirror is a direct reflection of you if you look at it philosophically. And the reality is you got nothing to do with the mirror and the person you see in the mirror. You associated that to your experience, but it's actually the person who comes and talks to you. At the end, that the system has extract from all your interaction. And so it's ambiguous again, because for you the mirror is like the direct response to your experience, which is actually at the end not really the fact. Yeah.
So I guess this is a follow-up on some of the other questions, and that is, in each of the conflicts that you're covering and that you have covered previously as a photojournalist, there's one level of the conflict that you're honing in on in this project that is about entire groups of people, individuals having a particular view of the individual human beings on the other side of the conflict that they're involved in. And then, like you just alluded to in terms of deciding that there's no use showing the enemy to members of the Knesset, that there's this other level of like geopolitical, economic interests that are driving all these conflicts. Right? So, in a similar way that race and racism is often talked about, both at the level of the individual attitudes and the structural and systemic.
Sure.
Right? So, what do you see as the relation between those two with this project? Are you just trying to, operate at the level of changing people's conceptions of the people on the other side of the conflict that they're involved in, or is that a first step towards something, like if you ideally were,
I don't see
to see this as like a step in social change, for example, is it about changing people's attitudes so that they put pressure on the
No, it's about a personal choice. And that goes to two things. I've been a storyteller, and with the enemy, something happened on the way. I've realized I had created an experience. My work as a photojournalist before has never been an experience. People were looking at the photo either in a magazine, even in a beautiful setting of a gallery, whatever it was, but it's never been really experiential. There, you had an experience. That made me reflect on the fact that life is a story, and everything in life is a story. We build stories about our friends, about ourselves, about our family. There is facts, and that story is punctuated by facts that on which we move. The dots are clear when we look back. But we need to make sense of the world, and we make sense through stories. Now, what really shapes us as human beings are emotions and experience. And experience provokes emotions. Stories can do too, but in a way, when you go through an experience, it's something that really can be transformative, much more than just a story. So my point here is not to some extent, I don't mind going to the leadership. I don't mind going to the Knesset or to Davos or in all those places. But it's not where I'm going to be concentrating. It's not the way I'm going to be designing my work. I'm going to be making sure that it can be understood by someone with no education or little education in Congo, as well as eventually can be understood by a high intellectual here at MIT or some other place. But it needs to be digestible by my target audience. And so that needs to be super simple. And in that sense, the fact that you're meeting people is something that everyone knows how to do. It's not a question of education to look at someone and listening to someone. How you remember and the facts and all of this can be part of education, but the meeting of people is something that it's inherently in all of us. And so going on this path as telling a story was something new for me and something that I found very efficient. So I want to keep, to some extent, pushing that to have it at a lower level, to some extent, really at the grassroots level where the people can take their own decision and get challenged their own way. Now, of course, I would love my work to provoke a conceptual change or change of perspective. And that's eventually the goal. But I also need to be clear that my work it's a trigger. I don't offer any answers. I don't tell who's right and who's wrong. I don't tell you what to do and how to proceed with those information. My job as a journalist, and I go back to really the fundamental of my journalism, is to bring in information that you didn't have before. Now, what you do with this information depends. It depends who you are, it depends your background, it depends your culture, it depends where you come from. And if we're talking about the target audience, that's where partnering with NGOs that works in reconciliation can, after that trigger, bring the conversation and push that further. But that's their work, it's not mine. My job is not to bring world peace. My job is to say maybe there is other ways and look what is the other and propose an intervention, which is also an experimentation. This you all had understood already, and see what happened from there.
So to pick up on that, before you start the experience, you fill out a little questionnaire that asks about your familiarity with the conflict, if you have a side in the conflict, a stake in it. How does that relate to the experience? Are the experiences malleable? Do they reflect any of my answers, or is it everyone has the same experience? I mean, within the boundaries of whether
Sure.
I choose to listen to, etc.
The iPad is only there to give the order of the conflict in which you're going to go through. That is the only reason for us. The sequence. So you can go with a what next to you, and for so long, but yet you might have because you answer it differently, or maybe your story is different. You might go through facing a fighter, thinking you're both facing the same fighter, but you're actually facing a different fighter. What we're trying to do with this is to detect an emotional charge you have in each of those conflicts, and then we propose that conflict at the end. Two reasons for that. One is first, if you walk through people you're not emotionally connected to in terms of really what you know from the conflicts, you can it will be easier to see the similarities they have. You do that for one conflict, you do that for the second conflict, and the third one is eventually the one where we could detect an emotional charge. That makes two things. That first, what is your role really at that point, and second, it kind of awake you again to the experience, because remember at that point it's 35 minutes. You have a VR headset, a backpack, and it's tiring to some extent. So then you get refreshed. And you clearly understand the system. You know what you need to do, and that was the beauty when I was in Israel, was to see Israeli walking towards Abu Khaled. In the real life, they go the other direction. They don't listen. They just go away. Here, they're safe enough to go, and that provokes. That was really interesting. That's a proposition that doesn't exist today, is to say, like, listen guys, go and talk to your enemy. Even though you might not see him as your enemy, you don't go up. Someone knows that very close. You stop me if I'm wrong, but you don't go there comfortable. You still go there with a lot of charge, and that's exactly what I want to do with my work. So it's either a triangle in which you can extract yourself and see the similarities, or either it's a face-to-face between you and your enemy, and you got to do and work towards that. This is very, very interesting. As a matter of fact, I have a video. I didn't show you a lot of visuals so far. Let me show you this.
מטורף. זה ככה. בן שעומד מולי, מתחיל לדבר, זה בעיקר העיף אותי. אז אתה מסתכל אבו חייל בעיניים, אתה לא יכול באמת להגיד שהאויב שלך. כי בסך הכל מה הוא עושה? הוא נלחם בשביל החירות שלו כמו שאתה נלחם בשביל זה. נלחם בשביל החיים שלו ובשביל המשפחה שלו. זה טיפה יותר גרם לי להבין שהצד השני הוא מתנהל באותה צורה בדיוק כמונו. עוד שנה, לא יודע מה אני אעשה בצבא, אבל בטוח זה יהיה משהו, אי אפשר לדעת, כאילו, זה בטוח יהיה משהו כנגד האויב, כביכול. כאילו, אני הולך להילחם נגדו, ומי שהסתכל לו בעיניים עכשיו. זה נורא מוזר, כי גם כשאתה חייל, אתה לא מקבל את ההזדמנות הזאת לעמוד מול האויב שלך ולשמוע אותו, זה בטוח מה שאתה מקבל בצבא. זה היה מעניין.
I have more testimonies, but
Military must
sorry.
be. Sorry.
But I didn't realize, but it was really my target audience. I only understood on the way that he was going to his military service after, and he was already scratching his head and says like, wow, okay, what am I going to do? And again, this is exactly my work is about, is to bring that information and let the people ponder and make their own choice after. I cannot decide what is right and what is wrong for him because he's got his own context.
But I think, you know, maybe you're underselling the potential for change that
Yeah.
these kinds of interventions can make. You know,
But that's my goal. No. Well, I'm just trying to be. I'm in a scientific institution today, so I'm gonna go with like cat feet. I'm not gonna say like, well, we're gonna change the whole world here. Let's go.
Can I just ask? This is much more. This isn't a filmmaking question, just a context question. You've been covering the Israel-Palestine conflict for a long time, but after the initial prototype, I'm curious how you chose the Congo and El Salvador context, and particularly El Salvador, because I've worked there. You know, it's not traditionally considered a conflict zone, so I'm just curious how you chose those.
Have you been through the enemy?
Yes.
Yeah. But then you might remember I says this is a war that doesn't carry its name.
Right.
It's a war within. And if you look at what is happening in El Salvador, for me it stands as technically a war. The common point is people were born with an enemy. It's generation after generation conflict. Whether you're born in that neighborhood, whether you're born in that country, whether you're born with that ethnicity, we've been giving you the enemy. Like I could say technically in the US, well, you have a whole world, the Muslim world, that has been giving to you as an enemy or something. You look at this. Not that everyone feels that we got a few millions or a few hundred millions enemies out there. But inherently the opposition is created this way. And this is what I'm trying to question. How do you still fight? Generation after generation. Your grandparents have fought. Your grandparents have fought. And so that's the common point in between all those conflicts. And now the reason for them to fight is very different. You got a gang war in El Salvador. You get a war that is based on the resources, the minerals and the mining in Congo. And you got a land war in Israel and Palestine. But the process of dehumanization of the other is similar. And so by taking example in different places in the world, you can show that it's in all of us, and it's not stuck to a place or to a religion or stuck to it's really in all of us.
And also it's structural, right? I mean, people at the top who want to fight the war need you to think of that other person the same way.
Of course, but it goes beyond that. I mean, William could probably talk about what is the representation of the enemy for the US in the 60s. What was it? Was the Russian, or maybe before it was the Nazi, and then it became the Russian, and it became today the Muslim world. I mean, it's not just your neighbor, it's not just the media, it's everything around you that's built, a story about the other. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your process? You mentioned earlier this sort of series of fortunate events of technology evolving as you're doing this sort of iterative design. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about balance. Like, how do you balance with the plan you have as technology is sort of changing, but then also this required a lot of funding. So how do you balance between the time spent sort of designing and the time spent fundraising?
Well, I have I'm working with a production company, and their role is to fundraise. No, I'm the best speaker of the work, so I'm often going with them when we have meetings, or even some people from Google, for example, where people that I had in my own network that I brought into the project after. So I don't spend so much time thinking about the funding because at some point the ball becomes too big. And the partners, there is too many partners. And to some extent, it's not a given, but it's too big to fail. I mean, yeah, you can fail the story, you can fail the whole thing, but you're going to have support from not not only the production company, but all the partners around. So, and that keeps pushing the ball further. And I spend much more time designing. I have an ethical, think really deeply about the ethical approach of my work. Can I do this? Can I not? If I cannot, what are the boundaries? What do I need to push? Because when you come with a new dimension in journalism comes with a set of ethics, and how do you adapt that to the new medium in which you are going into? Is it ethical to put people in a museum the same way I've done it, the fighters? Or I had a question, I think it was from you, why not bringing them into the context? Why not being in Congo? Why not being in El Salvador? This was really because I didn't want it to. I want you to focus on the human beings, regardless of the context of the conflict, the power structure in that conflict, but to focus really on the humanity of the people. So if I bring you to Congo, why do I bring you in Congo? In a street? In a school? In their place? Jean de Dieu, the guy you met in the enemy, doesn't have a place. He moved from village to village. So how do I start thinking about it, and how do I represent that? And is this going to be a distraction? Are you going to explore your environment much more than you're going to explore what the person has to say to you? My focus was really on the listening. That's something we don't do so much today, but when you have 15, 16, 17 years old going through the enemy for 50 minutes, they are uninterrupted. They are in the story. There is not a snapshot, there is not an Instagram, there is not a Facebook. Maybe it vibrates in the pocket, but they're still in it, uninterrupted. And that was really the reason why I didn't want to bring you to Gaza, or like, this is a good example. I bring you to Gaza or Tel Aviv, you're going to look at your environment, and that's going to tell you a lot of things. Not that they don't need to be told, but not in the context of this work and what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Have you thought about different implementation of the work, not only in the conflict area, but just like there's sort of possibility for different kind of, not only war, but different areas that people don't agree about, like climate change or some other things?
Yeah, but I'm a war correspondent.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. If you consider the option and thought about this possibility, maybe not like that you will do it in the future, but about the possibility of this that you have already done, like the example for other people.
I'm not sure I clearly understand the question. Excuse me.
Yeah. So when you have you thought, because that's the really amazing idea about bringing people to think and really like experience this like conflict. So do you think it will be also can it also be implemented in other areas?
Of course.
And what would you think of that? Do you have something?
No, I don't have anything. I mean, you can do basically anything you want. I think you need to look at it, who you are. If you're a journalist, you move with a set of ethics that is a journalist. If you're a non-fiction storyteller, documentary maker, the set of ethics is different. If you're an artist, it's different. I think you can touch on everything and anything. Yeah, basically you can. I don't think the medium is limitless. No, you need to. In my case, because it's about war, if I bring you under bombing in Congo or in Gaza, but you're going to go out. I mean, I believe you're going to walk out of this traumatized. If in the VR I take my book and I throw it to you, you're going to duck it. Your brain is not going to tell, well, I'm in VR, there was no book flying. It's going to take the safe bet. And so, cognitively, I don't know if I can say cognitively, but I'd say a part of you cannot make the difference in between the reality and what is given within the space. Consciously, yeah, you took the bus to come, or you took the car to come, or the bicycle, you put a headset, you equip yourself. Like consciously, you know all of this, but within the space, you kind of forget that, and that's where I think that medium is really special, because I think we're going to keep ducking books flying for a long time, while the train coming, when it's like the big comparison, the train coming, which year was that?
1995.
I don't think it did work for a long time.
Well, so yeah, there were cartoons that lasted a good 10 years after it, people allegedly ducking, but the point is they stopped ducking at a certain point.
Yeah.
And the uncanny valley will invariably move in your direction. I see a lot of VR. This one, and I don't think I duck in many cases, but with this one I do. And I think it's because of the responsiveness of the characters. they track me with their eyes, they back up a little bit when I get too close. That to me is what makes the trick work with the enemy. I don't leave during their conversations because it's impolite, even though I've seen this project evolve, and So you talked about the great coincidence of evolving technology and an evolving project. The thing I think that is the next big step are eye trackers and responsiveness, optical responsive systems. Is that in the future for this, or?
No, the project is the way it is now, and we're going to be working on the distribution, make sure it gets to the target audience, and then we can start seeing if it works or have kind of scientific and empirical data on that. And that's the goal. So distribute it as long as we can. I mean, the bad news and the good news is those conflicts are not going away. So the subject is still going to be relevant in a year, 2 years, or 3 years from now. No, maybe this is going to, and probably most likely going to look old 5 years from now. We're going to look at this and start thinking like, oh yeah, that was the first days of in-room VR. And I think we're going to go for technology that are much more, even it's like as you said, eye tracking, feeling in your hands, movements around. I mean, when you augment the sense more and more in different sense, you're gonna be able to go even much further into the experiential side of VR. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about the 6 men who participated. Like, do they know that they're walking around in a museum at MIT? Being recorded like they were, like, did it change? And even if they haven't gone through the experience, just the experience of being recorded this way, knowing they're part of this project and what you're trying to do, did that change their feelings about the conflict that they're part of?
It did for the Israeli and the Palestinian one. That's the people I have the most contact with, people I keep seeing and interacting with. Less for the Salvadorian and less for the Congolese one. I think we need to think about it, the level of education in those technology is very different given the different groups. Gilad had an understanding of what I wanted to do from the very start. Abu Khaled mostly also, even though he thought it was 3D TV and not 3D. When it comes to the Salvadorian or the Congolese one, they have no idea. They cannot even grasp what I'm trying to do. It's really, really, really hard for them to do that leap in the future because they're still working with old phones from early 2000. And really don't have that knowledge experience about the literacy in those media. But they all were aware, and I've been presenting that project to each of the individuals that have been part. They're all aware that they're going to face their enemy one way or another, even though they can sometimes not really clearly see what it's going to look like. But they knew that the same question will be asked on both sides. One of the things I wanted to do, when conducting my interviews, was to have foot soldiers, not the people who think the war, not the people who design the war, but the people who actually just do it. They've been trained, they've been brainwashed to some extent, they've been put to a context where, and they don't expect the question I'm asking them. They don't really reflect on what is the worst day of your life. Like if you can sometimes feel in the answers that they're surprised by the question, or they need to think about it like, wow, what is the most beautiful moment of my life? Kind of, because that's not something they're really actively thinking about. And they might, if they would have expected something was more into, are you right? Do you think you're right doing what you do? Like more expected question you could ask, bit more like, oh, but that's not a question I've decided to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions about sound. At what point in the process did you decide to do the narration and why? I get that there's sort of, you're giving some background info and you're helping navigate the space, but for me it was one of the most emotionally impactful parts of it. And second, related to that is many of the characters, if you don't speak their native language, you're hearing them dubbed. Have you noticed a difference from users if they speak the native language and they're hearing the actual voice of the person rather than hearing the dub?
On the second point, I can clearly, people are often talking, well, I speak Spanish and I listen to them, and so they would definitely tell me it was better because they could really connect with much more information than just a dub. Initially, what I wanted to do was to have an avatar next to you that would always follow you, and I would become your translator. And I would, like in the real life things, would tell you, you know what he says, and kind of speak in your ear for that. The problem with this was it would double the time of the experience. Because I'm listening to you, which is great because I have no dub voice, nothing. I can look at your body language. It's channel of communication. I'm fully into that at that point because I don't understand the rest of what you say. So I rely on other kind of understanding of you that I can use at that point. But then the translator speaks, and that would have doubled the whole experience. And we knew we were going for 45, 50 minutes. And at that point, already 45, 50 minutes, nobody had done VR experience for that long. I have no, plus you're walking. I mean, we knew that we were going into something that maybe people would not tolerate. It's too high, it's too long, it's too heavy, it's too, the screen is like this for 15 minutes, please give me a break. We had no idea, so we decided not to do that for that really reason. But I think it would have been a good idea to have a translator next to you, but again, that would have taken more time. What was the first part of the question? Yeah, my voice in the narrative in it. I was reluctant to do it. But we did it for different reasons. Financial one, I'm cheaper than any other voice. And so we used that for the prototype, and then the feedback we had out of the prototype is people says like, it's cool. So I was really surprised, but I was like, okay, if people tell me it's cool and I'm there and they feel reassured and I'm the guy who actually tells the story, who really have met those people, and that for quite some users it's reassuring to hear my voice there, then let's keep it. But I had a coach for the English, so you can see the difference right now, you see? My English is supposed to be slightly better within the enemy because I had the coach, and here I just let it go.
And your disciplining voice is interesting too, huh? For people who transgress.
Yeah. Yeah, so as we can track, we can know also if you're not listening, if you're not engaged in the content, you're not looking at the person that talks to you, eventually your voice says like, chill out. Plus, you really, if it's a multi-user thing, if someone goes into a fighter and start exploring, it's a disturbance for the other because you see this avatar moving left and right, and you want to focus or you're into your things, you don't want to be disturbed. So there is two different voices. There is a woman's voice and my voice that comes and says like, chill. No, chill. Listen, you're a disturbance for the other. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Sorry for walking in late. I'm coming from another meeting, but don't know if you covered this, but I'm really curious to know about your impact plan. Like you were saying that you're going to keep showing it as long as it's relevant, and maybe 5 years from now it'll be outdated. But I'm thinking about places where the majority of the soldiers in our country come from the middle of our country, for example, or sort of the more sort of working class parts of our country. This is going to play longer in a place like Lincoln, Nebraska, or Fargo, North.
I would love to. Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas, let's go.
What's your plan for getting?
I have no plan right now. I mean, I'm not in charge of that. But if you know people, I'd be happy to drop them a line and say, guys, check out. This is the website, and we're willing to come. It's. I mean, the one of the challenges is not cheap to bring this left and right. It's an investment from the place to really bring this in. So you really need a leadership, you need some funding to make this happen. But we're lining up places in the world now where we're going to go in the future. Unfortunately, there is nothing like Nebraska or Texas, Oklahoma. I would, definitely would love to go there. I mean, I'm happy to be here. It's just a different function if you go to different places. There was this museum in Tennessee, in Memphis. For, if I'm not right, for the connected to Martin Luther King, where they also, started proposing that can we come, and so a few ongoing conversation, and we hope it's gonna, left or right, it's gonna happen. I have no idea what time is it. We're good to go? Oh no, we still have some time. Good.
So Juan asked a question about technology that I don't know if I heard you respond to. Was there a temptation as you were going through to switch to the new technologies as more technology was becoming available?
I'm sorry?
Was there a temptation as you were going along through the 4 years to switch to new technologies, either new image capture technologies or whatever?
When it comes to the capture of the fighters, we've used 3 different technologies. You don't. It's 3 times. The first time was a Kinect. The second time was. I can't tell you. The second time and the third time was with an iPad. Because that was 2.5 years after we scanned the first one, and there was new solution. It was easier. There was less work and less post production for the rendering after. So we've been switching for that. At the end, it's really hard. I mean, we've built a system with OptiTrack for the tracking system. The Oculus, the system is built on this, and if we had to switch it to HTC Vive or others, that would require some more funding to be able to adapt the codes and then also test it eventually. But when it comes to tracking system, that was the only option we had back then. And I think if you want to do something in 3,000 square feet as of today, HTC Vive is still not allowing that to do. I mean, once you're going to be able to map together different connectors, you might eventually get to that space. But as of today, the space is still too reduced to even like invest in that direction with the project.
So yeah, I just want to ask, did you do any sort of surveys or evaluations before bringing this exhibition to MIT, or how did you kind of tailor it to this particular museum?
No, what we did, we had a floor plan of the MIT, and immersive, the team has worked on the floor plan, the numbers of camera they're going to need, how they're going to cover that pillar there, and how we're going to distribute the space. If you had come to Paris, it was really a square. You start one side, you go like this, you go out, and that's it. That was it was super simple. You get the bags where you actually pack the people. It really depends on the space, and the MIT was by far the most complicated one. By far the most complicated one.
So my question in a way was actually, so you tailor things is mainly for technology, but I guess you sort of maybe do anything to plan for the audience, difference in the audience?
No. There is nothing that is different. I mean, unless you fill up the questionnaire differently, the order of the conflict. For the rest, no. The content is the same. The tracking inside is the same. That doesn't evolve. Thanks God.
So one thing that I don't think is asked is, so you get the mirror at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And from talking to and I was shocked. I was like, this is the person I'm maybe least interested in, curious. But I heard that from you.
Well,
and I was just wondering, do we do any follow-up studies there? Like, do people? I was in fact surprised that there wasn't a question at the end. Did the person in the mirror meet your expectations, or was that a hit or a miss, or? Do you have
that would be a forced reflection that I'm asking you to have, and I think you really, at that point, you just really cooked. It's maybe not the right time to think about it, and let you walk out of this and scratching your head. For me, it's a better trigger. And so there was, but no, we don't have such a thing as now. We've done it a lot during the iteration periods, where we had a questionnaire that was set up by Fox to have the feedbacks from the users at the end. But I think we're asking you already quite a lot to some extent. We're asking you your time to backpack, to work for 50 minutes, to fill up the questionnaire at the start, to book your timing and to think about it and to remember it. I think there was really a lot of action that are required from the users. Not that this one is not interesting, but maybe no answer sometimes is good too. I don't know.
And building that, so William and I discussed this before, and it's actually hearing your explanation of the person you see in the mirror is the person who perhaps you behaved differently in front of makes a lot of sense now, because I was surprised that the person I saw in the mirror was perhaps the person I should have been most incredulous of. And now hearing your explanation, well, maybe it's not the person I had the most sympathy with, but clearly it is someone who I was behaving differently around. And so that's, the interpretation was different, but I think the body language analysis was pretty spot on. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you leave something open, people can grab their own thing in. If you're too specific, then most of the people would react negatively. Like with the feedback we give you during the installation, oh, you acted differently with one of the two fighters. We don't tell you who you've been acting differently. We let you ponder, and we tell you, you are tracked. We're here with you. So I like to say you experience the enemy, but the enemy experiences you too. And it's a given, it goes two ways. And yet you go through 100% of the content. It's interactive, it's linear, is it? I mean, I don't know how to place that. It's spatial, for sure.
I'm remember reading Mr. Fabian Barati as well. And he was saying this is very cutting edge technology. So how is this different from other VR headsets and games and so on?
There's nothing different. Well, I think when he says, when Fabian told you this, it was maybe about the tracking system, the fact that there is not to the best of my knowledge, a 3,000 square feet installation in the world in VR where you can work with 20 users. So in that sense, it's really pushing a lot of the boundaries to make it happen. So the scalability aspect of the enemy, that was already from, that was a requirement from the start. It was clearly the place we wanted to get. Are we going to get there? That was another question, but that's where we wanted to get from the start.
Yeah, because he was saying there's only 2 other similar projects. He said this in the industry, there's only 2 other similar projects in the world.
I think he referred to the game The Void. And maybe another thing, but connected to The Void too, where they've been really trying to use the space, but they even though they don't use that kind of space, not that large.
Multi-user is pretty interesting.
Well, if you want to distribute your work, you need to get there. There is no other way.
I haven't seen much of that, and this is really.
Yeah, and the avatar has been, we've discussed a lot that aspect with Fox, because as you can see, you've seen the avatar, it's genderless, raceless, you don't know who's behind, because the first one we had was done just for the purpose of, does it move around, does it move correctly, just to see what it looks like to have someone else around you. And there was someone who's done 9 to 5 job. So he had a tie, it was like, and it was a man. And with this raised a lot of questions like, why him? Why not a woman? And if a woman, then what the woman should look like. And like, okay, forget about all of this. Let's do something that we know there is someone, we're not interested in that, we just serve its purpose, which means don't bang into each other, be careful when you move, and that was the goal of it.
It kind of reminded me of like a gigantic penguin.
Yeah, or the messenger, you remember like 10 years ago, the messenger message, it was like this round head with the triangle under, something like very simple. That's my memory of it. I think again, if you're on a roller coaster in VR, you don't feel the motion of it. And so to some extent your brain says, oh, I've been poisoned here, or I had mushrooms, or whatever it was, but something is going wrong. And so that's where you don't feel comfortable. That's again because your brain is totally tricked. It cannot make the difference in between what is real and what is not. In the enemy, you walk. Someone you walk towards. You actually made 3 steps. You feel emotion going there. It's not like a joystick experience where you get close and it's like. And I'm very sensitive to this because I had not done VR. As a matter of fact, I've never done VR until about a month ago, where I started looking at what the others have done. And discover other type of experience, and I realize how sensitive I am as soon as it doesn't make sense, or my brain says like, no, it doesn't. So I'm really happy that we didn't have so much of that. But when we started, we were with the numbers that Oculus was talking about 25% of people which feel nauseous and not comfortable. But from the start, in the prototype, we had absolutely very it was non-existent. People says like, it's not for me, I don't feel good. And the only case that I can really remember during the prototype time was someone who was under heavy medicine treatment at that point, and that must have interacted with her. On the contrary, we had people very scared of the appearance of the 2 fighters when they come behind you during the time in the prototype, and they run for the door instead of lifting their heads. But very few surprised this way too. When people start running into the VR and you need to stop them because they're going to eventually end up in a wall.
So you didn't have that problem either because you're very sensitive.
Yeah, I didn't have that problem at all. Cool.
Thank you. Thank
Merci.
you very much.